I was just making tea in the kitchen when my husband pulled me closer until the tea boiled over. The morning had begun like any other, with sunlight trickling through the lace curtains, dust motes dancing in the glow, and the faint hum of the city outside drifting into the calm of our home. I loved mornings like this, quiet and filled with the sense that time was mine to hold. I stood by the stove, spoon in hand, watching the tea bubble slowly as the aroma of cinnamon, cardamom, and a hint of ginger wrapped around me. The kettle had just started its soft hiss when I felt him behind me. He hadn't made a sound, yet I knew it was him. Years together had taught me the rhythm of his footsteps, the subtle shift in the air when he entered a room, the quiet patience of his presence. Before I could turn, his arms encircled me, warm and grounding, pulling me into his chest. "You're going to make me spill this," I whispered with a laugh, holding the spoon midair. "Let it spill," he said, his voice husky from sleep, but carrying a softness that melted the edges of my heart. The tea hissed louder, demanding attention, but I couldn't move. His chin brushed my shoulder, his arms tightened slightly, and the world outside that kitchen seemed to fall away. I leaned back against him, my smile widening though I tried to keep up the pretense of scolding. "You're impossible. And you love me for it," he teased, his words brushing against my ear like a secret only meant for me. The tea boiled over, frothing and spilling onto the stove, but neither of us cared. What mattered was this, his arms around me, his warmth against my back, the steady rhythm of his breathing that reminded me of every moment we had built together. It's strange how something so simple can become so profound. To an outsider, it was just a husband hugging his wife in the kitchen, but to me, it was the universe shrinking down into a single embrace. I remember the very first time we met, years ago, in a grocery store of all places. I had been standing in the tea aisle, indecisive as usual, holding one box in each hand. Should I go with the familiar brand or be bold enough to try something new? He had walked past with his basket, glanced at me and paused. "If you want something smooth but strong, try that one," he said, pointing at the exact box I had been holding longest. I looked up, slightly annoyed that a stranger was inserting himself into my tea crisis, but when I saw his face, my irritation softened. There was a warmth to his smile, as if he carried laughter in his pockets and offered it freely to anyone who crossed his path. Against my usual cautious nature, I had taken his advice. Later, as if fate was nudging us closer, he appeared right behind me in the checkout line, holding only a carton of milk and a packet of biscuits. "Looks like we're both keeping it simple," he said, and this time I laughed. That small exchange became the thread that wove our story. A week later, he invited me for coffee, and though I hesitated, something inside me whispered to say yes. One coffee became two, late-night phone calls followed, and before I knew it, he had become a constant presence in my life. We didn't fall in love all at once. It was gradual, like tea steeping, slow, rich, and eventually impossible to ignore. Every conversation, every shared silence, every little act of care deepened what we had. When we moved in together, our apartment was tiny. The walls were so thin we could hear the neighbor's television, and the kitchen was barely large enough for one person to stand comfortably, let alone two. Yet, those years were some of the happiest of my life. We bumped elbows while cooking, dropped plates because of our clumsy coordination, and once set off the smoke alarm because we were too busy laughing to notice the toast burning. But none of it mattered. Love filled that cramped space, expanding it until it felt like a palace. Our first major purchase wasn't a big television or an expensive sofa. It was a sturdy kettle. He had joked that since I drank tea like it was water, we needed something reliable to keep up with me. That kettle became a symbol for us, a small but meaningful reminder that love doesn't always need grand gestures. It grows in the details, the quiet choices, the things we do every day without thinking. Years passed, and life brought its share of challenges. We argued sometimes, about bills, about work, about the little habits that rubbed against each other like stones. There were moments when silence stretched too long, when exhaustion from the day weighed heavier than words of love. Yet, through it all, there was a certainty between us, a thread that never broke. We always circled back to each other, always found our way back into each other's arms. That morning in the kitchen, with the tea boiling over, felt like all of those years condensed into one moment. He held me as though we had just met, as though the spark of those first days had never dimmed. And perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps real love is not about avoiding the mess, but about standing in the middle of it and choosing to hold on tighter. I turned in his arms, enough to meet his eyes. They carried the same warmth they had the day I first saw him in that tea aisle, the same kindness, the same mischief. "The tea's ruined," I said softly, though my words were more of a whisper than a protest. He smiled that familiar smile, the one that always unraveled me. "We can always make more. But this can't be replaced." Something in my chest ached at that, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming weight of love. I rested my head against his chest, letting his heartbeat steady me, letting the world outside fade into nothing. The kettle hissed its final breath before falling silent, the mess cooling on the stove, but we stayed like that, wrapped in a cocoon of warmth that no spilled tea could ruin. Later, when we cleaned the stove together, he teased me about letting it boil over. I accused him of distracting me, and we laughed until our sides hurt. Our laughter filled the kitchen, bouncing off the walls like sunlight itself. It was the kind of sound that healed, that reminded me why love is worth every spilled pot and every messy counter. As we sat down with a fresh cup of tea, I tucked the memory away, storing it carefully in the drawer of my heart reserved for the moments that matter most. One day, I thought, when we are older and life has slowed us down, I'll take this memory out and hold it close, reminding myself of the morning when time stopped and all that mattered was his embrace. Love, I realized then, isn't built in grand declarations or dramatic gestures. It's built in kitchens where tea boils over, in laughter shared over spilled sugar, in the quiet warmth of an embrace that says more than words ever could. And so, every time I make tea now, I think of that moment. I think of the man who once gave me advice in a grocery store, who turned an ordinary choice into an extraordinary journey, who still pulls me close as if the years have not dulled the fire between us. Sometimes, the tea boiling over isn't a mistake. Sometimes, it's the beginning of a memory you'll carry forever, a reminder that love is not about perfection. It's about presence, about choosing to hold on, again and again, no matter how many times the kettle overflows.